let's take it back a little bit and talk about your faith and your faith journey. Have you always been a believer, or did you have a moment in life that shifted it for you?
So I was raised in a Southern Baptist church by my grandparents, and I always tell people that you associate your connection, as a kid at least, you associate your connection to God with how cool your youth group is. And I think that at some point in your life, when you really grow up and you mature, your faith becomes your own.
Right.
It's very expected. Well, for me, I was in a rural setting to where I didn't really necessarily connect with my youth group. And even though we were in church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday, my grandparents were the leaders of this group called Awana, which is basically we recite Bible verses every single Wednesday night, and then you receive candy or rewards for doing it. So, you know, I knew the Bible in and out. I knew the verses in and out. However, it wasn't really something that I embodied as something of my own. Now, I can't say there was like a finger snap moment where my faith just became my own. However, when I went to college and when I ran track, my mind was all athletics, and my mind was all about maximizing my body to its fullest. Well, come to find out, I struggle with a ton of injuries. I get sick. All this stuff just starts to come over my experience. And then going back to the whole conversation of I live to find value in situations, I found out that I had to start making my track experience about people that weren't myself, because I wasn't able to produce on the track the way that my expectations had set up for myself. And so in that, I actually learned about the character. And this is not to say I wasn't opening the Word and getting in the Word, but I was learning more about who Jesus was and how Jesus walks simply by the fact that I just really wasn't trying to think about myself very often. And if you think we serve a God and a Jesus of sacrifice, I found myself having to sacrifice for my teammates all the time. But that's when really this whole Bible thing started to make a lot more sense, because I'm thinking, okay, the most impactful men in my life are strong fathers, strong husbands, great business owners, but they're also fully submitted and committed to the Lord. That's all of a sudden when their example started to be something that I wanted to understand deeper. And so you know how that rabbit hole of faith goes. The more you want to hear and listen to God's voice, and the more you're obedient to what he's commanding you to do, the sooner you get to know who he is. And I don't say all this stuff to say like I'm arrived and I'm perfect, because even during the pandemic, there were moments where I started to question truth. Because I was so used to doing everything on my own and finding out my own answers and trying to figure out everything, that in a way I got a little bit arrogant about my approach to faith.
Interesting.
But it's crazy how God can humble you in some of the smallest but also biggest ways that ultimately leads you right back to the thing you were looking at to begin with, and that's truth.
Well, and I think that's, especially in today's climate, that we all need to seek is just truth, right? Because there's so much chaos in the world, and there's so many voices in the world too that are speaking, I mean heretics, right? Just speaking fallacy, speaking, just craziness, right? And I think that's what we all need to seek, is that truth. So what was your experience like with the Baptist church? Because I've seen both ends of it, right? Like people grew up in it and loved it, and grew up in it, and it pushed them away from faith for a while, What was your experience with it?
For sure, yeah. And I see that a lot, and just even in the modern day church, it's how much we as believers wage war against each other because of our different, and I don't even want to say core beliefs, but just our different practice of those beliefs. And for me, in the time, I struggled with it a lot when I was younger, but it had less to do about theology and truth and more to do about culture, like the man-made stuff that we attach to how we communicate religion. And again, for the most part, it was a majority white church, and as a young melanated man, like I never really felt like I was one of those people on stage singing or preaching or whatever, and so I was just so far disconnected with it. However, as I've gotten older and I've gotten more mature, I recognize that there are people that were sitting in those pews on Sunday that was moved and touched by the love of God, and in that expression, they found salvation. And so even when it comes to mega churches or churches that are very into the urban expression or streetwear, fashion, your pastor wears diamonds and suits and all these other things, I try not to judge their expressions anymore, because I recognize it is speaking to somebody. And somebody has found the Lord, and somebody has found Jesus through that expression.
That is a really good way. It's so funny. I had a conversation last night that parallels this a lot, and I think that's a really good thing to look at. We get so trapped in in religion, not Christ, right? Like that's the truth. That's what we're all after. I'm not after being a Baptist or being a Catholic or, whatever it is. I'm after Jesus. And if we're focused on that, the expression of it, as you said, it doesn't really matter, but that expression may speak to somebody else differently, and it really, at the end of the day, who's to know what's right and wrong? We have the Bible as a guideline, right? But if you genuinely know Jesus, you're saved, right? No matter what life you live, no matter what expression you take on that, if you genuinely know Jesus, you're saved through that.
Amen. Yeah. In what I found out in my own life is that if there's ever a time where I'm judging other Christians or judging other church expressions, it's typically my ego that is making me judge that scenario. And if we are really to live like Christ and live a life of sacrifice, we have to kill that ego and really seek to understand who those people are speaking to. And then you'll find out, not necessarily that you're now stepping into the space of doing things that are sinful or wrong, but you find yourself in a posture of anything short of sin to reach people to the gospel, you're willing to support and invest in. And just the peace that I've had since I've come to that recognition of killing that ego has made me even more on fire to lean into a lot of these spaces that maybe I didn't feel like I could have connected to a few years ago.
Yeah. Well, that goes to a friend of mine used this example of, in the Civil War, for example, right? Like these soldiers the flag carrier. Everybody wanted to carry the flag because that was honorable, right? But you couldn't carry a gun if you were carrying the flag. So what happened to these guys? They grab that flag, they get shot. They go down, next guy grabs the flag, he gets shot, so on and so forth, and it just kept going until the battle was over, right? And in this world today, all of us grab our flag and are willing to die on that hill for that flag. Really, the only flag that matters to die for is Jesus. Right. Other than that, like, who cares? Who cares what's in the world? And that is going back to what you said about killing that ego, right? If you kill that ego, it doesn't. The rest of it doesn't matter.
Yeah, and even taking that back a step further, earlier in our conversation, you recognize that everybody, just by our human biological desires, everybody wants to be attached to something. So it's no wonder why we find ourselves holding all these different flags every time the news pushes something out, or find ourselves feeling like we have to.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a good point too.